Hi everyone, I'm Sheila. Welcome back to The Truth About Death and Dying. As always, I like to throw out the disclaimer that I'm not an expert in anything, but I do have experience with the dying process and helping someone on their final journey. On today's episode, I want to take you through the last week of my dad's life. Kind of things to recognize when you're coming up on that kind of final leg of the journey. I know for me, I was a little wiggy. I don't know if wiggy is the right word. About like, I would go to bed at night. I would wake up and think, oh, is my dad still here? Did my dad die on the overnight? How am I going to feel about coming in and he's gone? And, so when you're the primary caregiver for somebody and you're living in the house all the time and, you are very likely going to be the one that is going to be there when they die, whether they die while you're asleep or while you're, awake. So our routine had kind of gotten to the point where I was with my dad like Monday through Friday, Saturday. I can't remember. I think it was Saturday. And then my sister-in-law would come on board at 3:00. This is key for my story. My sister-in-law would show up at 3 on, I think it was Saturday afternoon, and she would stay until her husband, my oldest brother, Curtis, would get out of work, and then he would come and do the overnight with my dad. And then I think there was maybe sometimes Mindy, my sister-in-law, would come in on Sunday morning until my brother Craig would get there on Sunday afternoon, and then Craig would do the overnight on Sunday with my dad. So it gave me a couple of nights to have some respite and give my brothers a chance to, take care of my dad and spend time with him and my sister-in-law. And and for a while we had a couple of other family friends that would come in and would stay with my dad, which was nice for everyone involved. So that would kind of be, and then I would show back up on Monday and resume the reins for the week. So the week was coming to an end, and I was sitting on my dad's hospital bed in the living room and just talking to my dad, waiting for my sister-in-law to show up. And my father at this point was at the point, he was at the point, I'm going to say it 3 times, where he was it was tough for him to make decisions. So I'd be like, Dad, do you want a glass of ginger ale? And he'd be like, hum and ha and hum and ha. And it was a big deal to just say, yeah, I'd love a glass of ginger ale or whatever it might be that I was offering him. And after you take some time and step away, I'm like, why didn't I just bring him a glass of ginger ale? And if he wanted to drink it, he could. And if he didn't, I feel like I taxed his brain more than I needed to during those last couple of weeks. But you still wanted to maintain his independence and his control over whether or not he wanted something to eat or drink or whatever. But like hindsight's always 20/20, right? So anyway, but my father was having a hard time speaking a full sentence at this point. Yes or no answers were hard for him to come to. So we were at that point where his demise was, more imminent than it had been. So I was sitting on his hospital bed. I was talking to my dad, waiting for my sister-in-law, and my dad just started reciting this Bible verse. And my dad was very religious man, did Bible study every morning at his kitchen table while he was still able to. And his measurement for his capabilities, I guess, I'm not even sure how to word that, would be reciting Bible verses. Like if he couldn't remember Bible verses that he had memorized by heart, he knew that he was probably in trouble, I think, is kind of like where he was at. So we're sitting there, and my father just starts reciting this Bible verse, like verbatim, and like full sentences. It was probably like a good paragraph. I can't remember now how many sentences were in this paragraph, but probably at least 4 or 5, I was just like, oh my God, like what's going on? So he recited the Bible verse, and then he recited it again, and then he said, "Go get it." He had this particular Bible verse framed in his little hallway, so he said, "Go get the Bible verse and tell me if I did it right." So I was like, "Oh, okay." So I went over, got the Bible verse, and he did it again. He recited this Bible verse again, and I said, "Dad, not only did you get it right, but you added some extra to it, like that, isn't on this framed picture of it." So anyway, I was like, that was kind of like, that's weird. And then my dad kind of suddenly said, Don't forget to pay Pastor Ed." And I said, "Okay." So to back up just a little bit, my dad, when he lived in Winthrop, went to a church and his pastor's name was Ed. And my dad still participated online church through COVID with this church that he loved. And so he said to me, because when you get someone to do the funeral, a minister or whatever, typically you give them a gift for doing the service. So my dad said, "Don't forget to pay Pastor Ed." And I said, "Are you planning to check out soon?" And he said, "Well, I said, "Well, Dad, if Jesus comes to get you, you better get in the car and go with him, so don't mess around." But it caused me to pause and think, "Oh God, should I not go on my respite break this weekend, or should I stay behind?" And my dad didn't ask me to stay. If he had asked me straight up to stay, I would have stayed. But he didn't, and I knew it was important for my brothers to have that time with him, and also for me to have my respite break, because I didn't know at that point how much longer he had to go. So another thing we did was every weekend I would write out who was coming and when. So Saturday afternoon at 3:00, Mindy was going to be there. At whatever time, I can't remember now what time my brother got out of work, Curtis would be here. And then Mindy would be back. And then Craig would be here. And then I'll be back. And, so my dad had that right on his table side so he could look at it and know who was going to be there and when to expect the next person to come on to duty. So, we had a little moment. And so before I left, I gave him a hug and I said, "Dad, I love you. And, if you've been a great dad." I remember just telling him, "You've been a great dad and I love you." And just kind of this might be the last chance I have to speak to my dad. I could come back on, or I could leave and he could die overnight. I didn't know. And I still hold a lot of guilt for that. But on the same token, I'm glad that my brothers were also able to have that time with him. So, anyway, I went on my respite break, and and over the weekend, it was getting more difficult for my father to use the bathroom, and we had a little commode, a portable little commode, and so I told my brother Craig, I said, you got to do a little dance with him, you got to get him up, and we had one of those sit stand recliners, which is key, and if you are in a position with somebody that is having difficulties getting up and is still mobile a little bit, these are a lifesaver. They put the person right up almost onto their feet. So there's not that trying to sit back. Oh, am I there? And it's that's horrible. So these are really great. And then they can just kind of lean back and sit back in the chair. So I told my brother, I said, "Just get him up, do a little dance. You just kind of shuffle him around, put him on the commode, let him do his thing, get him back up, do the little dance, back into the chair." So, but my brother had difficulties that weekend getting my father, from the chair into his bed. And he had a little walker that you could sit him in and, pull him as well. So there were other helpful things. And I probably should mention this, is that hospice is wonderful about getting hospital beds, getting walkers and commodes, and maybe not walkers, but commodes and other things that will help assist you as the person you're taking care of declines and needs more assistance, like getting bathed or getting to the bathroom or on a commode or just into bed. So, and hospice will bring these in. It's like a rental. It's a free rental, but they'll come back and get the stuff when your person has passed away or died, and they will. But there are tools. So talk to hospice about things you might need, and they will get you hooked right up. So my dad had a little walker that he could sit down on, or he could move it along. So at this point, where he would sit and where his bed was, it wasn't a great distance, but when your mobility is really pretty much gone, it's tough. So my brother moved my dad's hospital bed right next to the chair. Just really had a difficulty getting my father from the chair into the bed to sleep. So, so my dad slept in his chair, which was fine. I mean, it was a comfortable chair. He could recline back, and so on Monday when I got back, before I got back, Christine, who was my dad's social worker, who I will have on this program with me at one point or another, maybe several times. She showed up on Monday and was able to help Craig get my dad into bed. So that was nice. When I arrived on Monday, that's when Craig had told me that he had upped dad's morphine because he was starting to complain or make noises that gave Craig the impression that he needed a little more morphine to be comfortable. So, and I was completely on board with that. I thought that was the right choice to make, and I was glad that he did it, because the whole point of hospice is to be pain-free, if you can be pain-free. So, and so I got back on Monday, and Dad was, at this point, pretty much nonverbal. Like, he made a couple little comments, but not much after that. And so this was on Monday, and so I got back, and Craig and Mindy were both there, and Dad needed his medicine, or I can't remember which one maybe exactly I was giving him, but anyway, so I went in, and Mindy said, well, he won't take it. So I go, give it to me. Going, Dad, open your mouth, put it in, done. She's like, how'd you do that? I said, you can't ask him anymore. You can't ask him, do you want your medicine, Jim? No, he doesn't want it. He's going to say no, or give me a minute, or no, whatever. You just have to, there's a point you get to where you just have to take over their decision making. And that's a really tough place to be, because then it just indicates that the end is really, really near. But it's too taxing for them to be like, oh, do you want your morphine, Dad? No, probably not. He's going to say no, or no, not right now, or whatever. So I just went in and did it. Just open your mouth, Dad, and under the tongue it goes, and that's the end of it. So I also made the decision to get my dad a catheter, because I realized that just the trouble my brother had, and he probably should have been cathed earlier, but again, trying to maintain that independence and let them have a little more control. And it's a whole thing. And it's not just a cut and dry, oh, we're just going to stop this and do that. You don't want to get them to give up their control any more than they want to give up their control. But there's a point where you just kind of have to, and Christine had a conversation, I think, with my father during that, when I wasn't there, where she, they had a conversation where he understood that he needed to relinquish his control to us, and was okay with that. So it was nice to have Christine as that kind of, buffer, and to have that conversation with my dad, because sometimes it's tougher for family members to have those conversations than a social worker or somebody else in hospice that has that knowledge, that can have that conversation and get those answers that you need. So I decided that we needed to get my dad a catheter so he didn't have to worry about getting out of bed anymore. And if he, and at this point he really wasn't drinking, and he certainly wasn't eating anything anymore. And so really he put out very little into this catheter, but I just didn't want him to have to be shuffled around or stood up, or just the whole process is a lot for someone that's really actively dying. So there's that piece of it. And my dad at that point really was verbal going forward. So as the days went by, he really wasn't putting out a lot. And then what happens is the body starts to shut down, and then the poop comes. And I don't know any other nice way to put it, but and so I had to change my dad. And so one day he did it 3 times, and luckily my mom was there one time with me to help me, because it's a whole process. When someone is laying there virtually unconscious and you have to change them, there's a technique to it which hospice showed us, which was great. There's a sheet that we'll roll them. And so you can do it on your own. I didn't want to have to do it on my own, but I ended up having to do it on my own. And I think I did it twice on my own. It's very dark in color. It's almost black. And that's just another sign that their body is starting to the shutdown process. So that was difficult for me also, because that was one thing I really didn't want to have to do for my father. And not that just because he's a man and I'm a woman and I'm his daughter, and it's just a weird situation to be in. But again, I was the only one there. I wasn't just going to let him sit in that, whether he was conscious or not. I didn't want him to have to do that. So, he moved along, and so for the next 3 or 4 days, every night I would go to bed and I would wake up thinking, am I going to go out there and is he going to be gone? I wanted to be the one, or I wanted to be one of the people, not just like the only one, but I wanted to be there when my dad took his final breath. I wanted to hold his hand. I wanted to be a part of that final journey with him. But we don't get to make that decision always. I feel like the final piece of control that a person who is dying gets to hold on to is who is there when they die. And I think 100% that they wait until the scenario is perfect for them, and then they make their departure. You hear stories about people that wait for a child that needs to travel to get there before they die. Sometimes they wait until there's nobody in the room before they die. So I think there's 1,000 different scenarios of when a person decides that, no, this is when I'm going to check out. And I think that they 100%, that is their final act of control in their life. So I really didn't know how this was going to play out, but I never told my father that I wanted to be there to hold his hand, but I told other people, and I just, in my heart, I wanted to be the one, or not the one, but I wanted to be one of the people in the room with him when he died. I didn't want him to be, on that final little push by himself. And so every morning I woke up, I was just grateful that he was still with me. And I hoped that, my brothers could be there if that was the choice, or my other family members. So by Thursday, my dad, I'm trying to remember when I had the catheter removed. It was obvious that he was not putting out anything. And at that point I was like, you know what, if he does urinate, I don't care. I can change it. I don't need him to have that catheter. And I wasn't sure how comfortable it was for him. So, anyway, the weekend was coming up, which was our typical, my sister-in-law would be coming in and my brothers would come in, and I didn't know how long my dad was going to hold on, So, on Friday, the nurse had come in, and it was a different nurse. My dad's normal hospice nurse was on vacation. So he had a fill-in nurse come in and just check in. And so I think that was the day, I think it was actually Friday, I took the catheter out. And, she and I were having a conversation at the end of his bed. And I just said, I don't know if I should take my respite break this weekend. I think maybe I even said to her, I want to be here. I don't remember exactly the conversation we had, but, and she said, just say, hey, Dad, it's 3:00, Mindy's coming, and, blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to go on my respite break. And so we had this conversation at the end of his bed. And I think at that point I was like, I don't think I can leave this weekend. I don't want to leave if he's going to die. I want to be here when he dies, if I can. And so, and I just knew that we were getting really close. He hadn't eaten anything. He hadn't had anything to drink. So, and he wasn't putting any bodily fluids out anymore. So I knew it was pretty close. So, my mother had stopped by to visit, and Christine was there. And so we were just the three of us were just talking, around my dad, like he was in the room with us. And, my mother had to go to work. So she said goodbye, and, out she went. And it was about 2 I think my mom had to work at 3 or something, and it was like 2:30, 2:45 in the afternoon. And Christine and I were just talking by my dad, and she had predicted, she's like, I think, he's probably got maybe 24, maybe 48 hours left, and hospice knows because they do this all the time. There's signs they look for. So she said, I think that's probably what we're looking at for a time frame. Maybe it was 12 to 24 hours. I can't even honestly remember now what she said, but it was close. So we were just chatting by his bed, and suddenly we heard the death rattle. And she's like, oh, she said, I think I might have my time frame wrong. And I said, should I call my brothers? And she said, yeah, I think you should call your brothers. So in the meantime, we got him the medication that's supposed to help with that death rattle. I'm trying to make phone calls to my brothers, like, this is it, get over here if you can, So my brother Curtis worked pretty close to where my dad lived, maybe a mile or two. And my brother Craig lives in Bar Harbor, so he's an hour away. And I'm thinking, oh my God, he's not going to get here. So, and it just so happened that my brother and my sister-in-law were in a meeting with the principal, or like a parent-teacher conference or something for my nephew. So they weren't answering their phones. And so, I just took my dad's hand, sat next to him, and Christine was like, do you want me to leave, or do you want me to... I'm like, oh my God, I don't want you to leave. Like, don't leave me here. I want the comfort. So, Christine sat with me, and, it's a weird thing, those final moments, and you've read about it. You've tried to prepare yourself the most you can, the best you can. And, but and I'm not sure everyone does this, but in my dad's case, it's very typical that, you get the death rattle, and then they start doing what they call the fish breathing, like the fish out of water breathing, where it's kind of, it's a weird thing to experience and to watch. But at the time, I knew that my dad wasn't in any pain. He wasn't suffering. I just knew that it was his body shutting down. And, I held his hand and talked him through. I honestly don't even remember what I said, and I had Christine there to comfort me, or we kind of comforted each other. But it didn't last a long time. His breathing didn't last a long time. And I just remember Christine, at one point she called the time of death, and it was like 2:57 or something. And then my dad kind of took a couple more breaths, and she was like, oh, nope. And like, I think she called it like 3 times before she finally settled on, it's 3:00. And that was it. And then my brother Kurt showed up, like, my God, like 2 minutes after. And I'm just like, oh my God, like, but I think we were all where we were supposed to be. Like, I just think my dad had who he wanted to have, and I don't say it like, oh, he wanted me there and Christine, and that was it. But I think, I was his captain, and so I was so grateful that I was able to be there with him when he took his last breath. It was beautiful and sad, but I think, my dad, that was his choice. That's when he chose to check out, as he would always say. And so, it's almost like I had those couple of minutes to say my goodbyes before just chaos takes over, because people are showing up, and now I gotta make phone calls, and, it's a whole thing after that, and, so, as families coming in and saying their goodbyes, and, Christine, she's like, do you want to put him in the clothes you want to bury him in? And my dad was pretty specific about what he wanted to be buried in. He was not a suit kind of guy. He said, I want to be buried in my dungarees, because that's what he called them. And so he wanted to be buried in his dungarees and a sweatshirt, because that's, when you saw my father, 9 times out of 10, that's what he would be wearing, and that's what he wanted to be buried in. And so my brothers and I always called him Pappy. That was our kind of nickname for him. And I had a shirt years ago made up saying some of the world's greatest people, or I can't remember the exact wording now, call me Pappy. And so we put that on. And so Christine said, either we can change him right now, or we can send the clothes to the funeral home and they can do it. And I said, no, let's do that now. So Christine and I got my dad into his funeral clothes and put the Pappy shirt on him, and then put the blue sweatshirt on top, and then waited. And the thing about when someone dies, and maybe you know this and maybe you don't, but you don't have to call the funeral home immediately. You don't have to call them to come get the body immediately. You can take as much time as you need for family to come to say their goodbyes, and that's important too, to kind of have that private time. It's really special, actually. And so my brother Craig, like I said, lived in Bar Harbor, which is an hour from Bangor. And I called him back and I said, Craig, Dad died. And I'm not calling the funeral parlor yet because I want to give you the opportunity to say your goodbyes here at his house if that's what you want. And Craig opted not to do that. He said, no, it's okay. I don't need to see him dead at home. Like, it's fine. I'll see him at the funeral, and it's okay. So once my niece and my nephew and my mom and my, the immediate family that I called to come say their goodbyes at Dad's house had come, then I called the funeral home and they sent someone to come get my dad. And my dad was a veteran. He worked, he was a member of the Air National Guard for 30 years. He was a boom operator and loved his job and loved his country. And so when the funeral home came, they draped an American flag over his casket, which was really beautiful. And they had to take him out the front door, of course. Not, of course, you wouldn't know that, but they took him out the front door. And his neighbor, who lived directly across the street, who was failing in health as well, had come out and saluted my dad. And it was just a beautiful kind of, send off for him. And he had a wonderful little community in his neighborhood over there, and they were really wonderful through the whole thing. They were really wonderful. So that was kind of the ritual, the last, week of my dad's life, and kind of how we all handled it. And, my father was really funny in that he would say, like, he would tell my nephew, who is an adult, and they were super close, and my nephew would go travel and stuff, and my dad would be like, listen, Zach, if you come back and I'm gone, don't feel bad. Don't feel bad, And he he was notorious for saying that. He'd be like, look, if I kick off, don't feel bad. I'm like, pretty sure, Dad, if you die, I'm going to feel bad about you dying. Like, that's, it's nice to hear, but, but he was okay with it. He was okay with dying. He was good with God. Which was a huge comfort to us as his family, because I think a lot of times if people are like, oh my God, they don't have peace with where they're going, that can, transfer to the people that are caring for you, because then you're like, oh my God, so for my father to be at peace with where he was going to go when he died, was a huge comfort to the rest of us, because, we were like, hey, he's all right with it. Why should I feel bad if he doesn't feel bad about it? So, and I think that was kind of what his interpretation, or what he meant by that. Like, don't feel bad. I'm good. I'm with Jesus. It's all good. But he used to say it so much, and so my nephew, who I hope he doesn't mind I tell this little snippet about, but I think it just speaks to, like, my dad's kind of like, hey, everything's going to be great. I'm going to see Jesus and everything's going to be all right, and I'm so glad that that's how he felt. And so when my nephew showed up at the house before my dad, the funeral home came and got him, my nephew had a chance to spend a little time without him. But I could see that my nephew was like struggling a little bit. And I said, he goes, well, he's in a better place. He's in a better place. I said, he is in a better place. I said, but it doesn't mean that we're not sad about it, and that it, and so I don't think my dad realized, like, just him being so, like, you know, not blasé about it. I guess blasé is as good as word any, but just like, hey, don't worry about it. If I'm gone, don't worry. I've checked out. I've gone to a better place. I'm good, But he didn't really take into consideration how we were all going to feel when he checked out. That we weren't necessarily going to be so great, but everyone works through their grief in their own way, and it's good to talk about it with each other and check in with each other. And so my father, who was funny, because when we would go out to eat, my dad would be like, I'll buy you dinner or lunch, but I'm not paying for your alcohol. He would never buy me a drink. So if I wanted to have a drink, I had to buy that myself. So after my father died, I had access to his credit card because I was on everything and I had to pay all his bills. And I said, you know what? I said, we're going to go out to dinner tonight and Dad's going to pay for it. And he's going to buy us all a drink. So we went to a local restaurant, which he absolutely loved. And as we were all leaving the house, everyone had their own cars. And so we're all getting into our vehicles. And he had these lights on his garage that were like solar lights. So, they powered by the sun. And these lights were just going crazy. And I was like, hey, Dad, like, this is great, and nobody else saw it. Nobody else like recognized that these lights were going crazy. They'd never done that before. And so we left, came back, and the lights weren't doing it until we were leaving it. I think my brother Craig, I pointed it out to him, and he was like, oh my God, that's awesome, So look for signs, because I think sometimes spirits hang around a little bit, and check it out. So when we went to the restaurant, we sat down, and there was one extra chair, just so happened. And I said, well, that chair's for Dad, and he's probably already spinning because I'm buying everyone a drink on his tab. But anyway, but that was just, kind of my experience and things to look for if you're in that situation, that, look for the signs. And, sometimes people will start talking about things that are weird, that you like, oh, are they losing it? But sometimes I think when people get close to death, they'll start talking about, oh, I got to pack my bags. I got to meet the train. The train's coming at whatever time, la da 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 da. And so, that's them getting ready. That's them getting ready to move on to the next realm. So, and I think significantly with my dad and the 3 o'clock, I really think, and this is no, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to my sister-in-law in any way, and I don't think my dad was either, but my sister-in-law always showed up at 3 o'clock to relieve me. And I think my dad, when I was having that conversation with the hospice nurse, I think he thought it was Saturday, and that my sister-in-law was going to be there at 3. I don't know why it was so strange, but like, it was like almost like 3 o'clock. He's like, nope, I'm going. You're leaving. I'm leaving. We're going to leave at the same time. Like, I feel like that's kind of like where his mind might have been. I could be completely wrong about that, but anyways, that's just my thoughts on that. So I think people decide. I think that's their kind of final bit of control with their life. So I hope this was helpful to you. I know it was a bit therapeutic for me to kind of tell that story another time and just kind of honor my dad's life in that way. So I wish you peace and love, and I hope a gentle journey for your loved one that's making their exit out of this world. Thank you for stopping by, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks.